I wanted to first thank Inside Higher Ed for facilitating the logistics of this webinar. We should have about 15 minutes or more for question and answers at the end. Feel free to type your questions into the QA section as we go. We have a large, diverse group of attendees from all over the US, so we probably won't answer those questions till the end, but keep them coming as we go. So I'm going to start by introducing our panelists. Kenton Doyl is the Director of Web Publishing at Harvard University Information Technology. He's been shaping the web landscape at Harvard University IT since 2004, bringing extensive expertise in web and user experience strategy, consulting, service delivery, and project management. In his early days, he honed his skills through hands-on work, from building digital solutions and managing inventories to collaborating with diverse teams and clients across different technologies. Passionate about being a practitioner, Kenton now focuses on aligning Harvard's digital offerings with Harvard University IT's strategy and the university's evolving needs. He leads a dedicated team tasked with the humbling and amazing challenge of helping Harvard share its knowledge with the world while breaking down digital access barriers. One of Kenton's favorite parts of the job is promoting his team's incredible work and making digital content more accessible for everyone. Outside of work, Kenton enjoys spending time and traveling with his family, coaching or watching his kids play soccer, and exploring the world on his bike. Joel Pattison is the Assistant Vice President for Web and Digital Experience at Brown University. He is a technologist and user experience strategist with over 15 years of experience in the higher education and nonprofit sectors. As the AVP for Web and Digital Experience at Brown University, he leads strategy and user experience for Brown's digital ecosystem. Joel built the university's central web team from the ground up and led a multi-year effort to transform the user experience of Brown's websites. Prior to Brown, Joel served as Director of Strategy at M. Stoner, now Carnegie, a digital agency focused on creative and marketing solutions for higher education and nonprofits. Joel's career began at institutions like the University of Virginia and the College of William and Mary, where he built and led digital teams, spearheaded creative initiatives, and delivered impactful web solutions. His passion for user-centric digital experiences continues to shape his work, driving innovation and strategic growth across the institutions he serves. I want to tell our audience that neither Joel or Kenton are endorsing any products or companies today. They're not being compensated in any way, and they're here because they have a passion for what they do, and they're being generous with their time. So thank you to you both. Erin Schroder is a senior content strategist at Lullabot with a unique blend of strategic expertise and a journalism background. She's helped clients like IBM, the state of Massachusetts, and Dartmouth Health enhance content discoverability and clarity while meeting stakeholder goals. Prior to joining Lullabot, Erin was a senior content strategist at Geonetric, where she developed content strategies, information architecture, and user experience analyses for healthcare organizations nationwide, including UNC Health, East Tennessee Children's Hospital. And with over a decade of experience as a journalist in the Quad Cities of Iowa and Illinois, Erin also taught news writing and photojournalism at Scott Community College. A passionate writer, she shares her insights on content strategy and user experience at lullabot.com, UX Collective, and UX Booth. Based in Cedar Rapids, Indiana, with her husband Andrew and Kat Otis, Erin enjoys reading, crocheting, collecting vinyl records, kayaking, and mastering Beatles trivia in her free time. My name is Jeff Dillon. I'm a digital strategist for higher education at SearchStax. I'm also the founder of EdTech Connect, a technology solution and service provider directory created for the higher education community. I spent 21 years in leadership roles at two large public institutions where I managed the selection, implementation, and support for the campus website, portal, site search, mobile app, as well as many of the web applications all over campus. So I have experience working with institutions on digital experience, personalization, content discovery strategies, and even AI. My thought is that by serving as the moderator today, I can bring a perspective from a more centralized digital ecosystem. And I hope that by talking with the leaders of these very complex challenges, that we can all grasp something to take back to your institution. So I want to start and set the stage by describing the challenge. Universities today face a growing challenge on how to ensure that students, prospective students, faculty, parents, donors, community members, and all those other stakeholders can easily find what they need in this ever-expanding digital landscape. With so much content spread across multiple platforms, even organizations within the university have to be considered. And this has become a real challenge. And it's compounded by the need to balance the diverse priorities of various stakeholders, from academic departments to administrative units, all while we maintain this cohesive and user-friendly digital presence, which is where it's getting a little tricky, to say it nicely. Today, we'll dive into how universities can address these challenges with a dual approach. And I've spoken to close to 100 institutions in the past 2 years of all types, private, public, community colleges, all the way up to the R1s and the Ivies. And many of you may notice quickly that there are differences in how Harvard and Brown are doing things, but I hope we discover that there's many commonalities as well. So I'm going to kick it off with an open question here. When it comes to managing your institution's digital content, what's the first challenge that comes to mind at Brown, Joel?
Well, it's afternoon for me. I'll say hello, everyone, and thank you all for having me. Yeah, I think you kind of touched on it already a little bit, Jeff, and it's really about, I think, the size and complexity of the digital ecosystems that we have at Brown, and I think at other research institutions. So, digital presence is made up of many things, your web presence, mobile applications, event systems, web applications, a whole array of things. And then if you dive into one of those categories, they can be quite large. So at Brown, as Jeff mentioned, we've done a lot of work over the past few years to make our website presence more cohesive and kind of more strategic. But we still have thousands of websites at Brown, thousands of websites. And so just the size and complexity, the number of people we're talking to, the number of goals spread across that ecosystem is really the kind of the core challenge, or the big challenges I think of when I think of the first set of challenges.
How about you, Kenton?
Sure. I mean, hi, everybody. I'll also say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everybody here. Thanks so much for having me today. Plus one to everything Joel said. I think, inherent in the challenge is decentralization, right? So what's the first challenge? That is challenging in and of itself, decentralization. But I think kind of more, at a higher level, it's really the friction between the desire for autonomy, or actually units being purposefully autonomous, and then the institutional need for standardization when it comes to things like accessibility, security, policy-based institutional needs.
Thank you. So digital governance might mean something totally different at various institutions, especially based on budget or FTE, which seem to be somewhat correlated to decentralization. I come from large public institutions. We were very centralized, or we were really pushing for that. And there was, like you just said, accessibility, content best practices, and brand policies were such a challenge. So can you just talk about, Kenton, how do you define digital governance in digital ecosystems so complex, like your schools?
The definition of it, I think that's an interesting word choice. So what I think you find is you look all around higher ed, and at Harvard included, governance means different things at differing levels of the organization. So if you think about it from an institutional perspective, school by school by school, say professional school A, professional school B, they might have very differing approaches to governing their own schools. And then when you think about that at the institutional level, trying to find universal alignment across all the schools and the ways that major units and schools are collaborating or aligning on policies. Thankfully, there are centrifugal forces like, again, I'll just mention it, security, like accessibility, ensuring that content can be accessible to everybody. That's I think, gotten a lot of alignment, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Joel, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I think exactly, you said many of the things we experience as well. And I think, it's again, it's such a broad topic, digital governance. I think that, um, it helps to have a set of kind of guiding principles for an institution. But then I think, again, you have to kind of segment it in what specifically are you talking about? Are you talking about governance of, your web presence, which might be different from how you govern mobile apps or web applications that meet business needs? And within those categories, websites, there's websites that represent academic units and offices and departments and schools. There's websites that represent individual faculty members and research studies, and there's websites aimed at prospective students and people who are interested in engaging with the university. And so I think you have to think about governance within those categories when you're talking about something so large, so that you can kind of break it down and be more specific about what do you mean and what specifically are you doing in those different areas to achieve a level of governance that's effective.
I think if you're looking at this from a smaller school perspective, it might be somewhat mind-blowing to think of multiple digital governance models for different areas, but that's really what we're dealing with at these large institutions. It sounds like governance models, digital governance throughout your organization in somewhat of a siloed manner. So, Erin, from an agency perspective, you've seen a lot of these kind of situations. How do you balance the need for working with a centralized content management system with the necessity of maintaining this unified digital experience?
That's a great question. I don't know that anyone has it all solved, but not to, dogpile on what Joel and Kenton said, but also to kind of piggyback for sure. There's a need for autonomy across large organizations. And aside from higher education, also in government and healthcare, you have these really big, all-encompassing organizations that have multiple agencies, multiple schools, multiple hospitals. And so you do have a need for some autonomy because they do have different purposes and audiences and missions that they serve. When you're looking at a centralized CMS, so you're choosing a content management system that, say, every school uses, there's benefits to that because you can train and document and have a system that is built for authors to be able to efficiently do their jobs. And that's really key. I think when we think about website redesigns and website structure, we think about the end experience for the person on the other side of the screen. But there's a lot of value in building a unified experience behind the scenes so that authors across the schools, regardless of their experiences, can efficiently and confidently create a page of content, update their site, keep it manageable for what they need and who the audiences are trying to reach. In terms of a unified design experience, that's another kind of a loaded question because I think there's a lot of branding and style that goes into a unified brand. So for a large school like Harvard or Brown, they have their Brown and Harvard presence, but then each school still has its very unique mission. And so again, there's a value to leaving that autonomy for schools to do that, but still empowering them with a CMS that gives them the tools they need to do their job well and efficiently. And also, brand guidelines and of course, security and accessibility guidelines that need to be adhered to so that that brand stands consistently together, even if the school stands individually as one.
Yeah, I agree with that. Having such a distributed governance footprint and model, as Ken mentioned, it makes privacy, security, accessibility so hard to manage. We have a lot of marketers on our call today. So I'm interested in the brand management perspective of that. What are the challenges of maintaining a design system across such a decentralized organization where you only have a carrot, not a stick, to encourage but not mandate departments use the system? I'll throw it out to Joel. You have a thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of, again, kind of connect to what Erin was saying, that creating a great experience within a CMS and within a design system is really powerful. Creating something that people want to be a part of is one piece of it. Something I've really worked to do, and I think it has proven effective a lot of the times, is to think about working with the units across Brown, across the institution, to think about their content. To the extent that they have resources available to them, invest those resources in your content and rely on these central tools to provide the design system and the technology, because a lot of times good design systems get out of the way and really are ways to spotlight feature content anyway. So use your resources to, shoot great video, take great photos, write great content, put your resources there rather than investing in kind of a duplicative design system so that you have a slightly different way, like a card or a poster or a slideshow works on your website. You're going to get more kind of ROI, more bang for your buck from doing it that way.
Fun. Kenton.
Sure. Again, I'm going to +1 with Joel there. That is the very general guidance that we're giving to all of our partners, and our stakeholders now is invest heavily in the content and the content strategy and the organization of the content. I mean, with the rise of, AI tools ingesting the content and then repurposing for answers, that I think it's starting to really hit home with people that the overall aesthetic is a little less meaningful these days than it was, say, as recently as 3 to 5 years ago. Not to say that aesthetic isn't important. It is. We want our digital presence to reflect our physical presence, and we wouldn't expect to see an unkempt, grass or hedges walking through Harvard Yard, right? So we it sounds cheeky to say, but we want our digital presence to kind of reflect our physical presence. And so the aesthetic is important, but I'd say it's far less important than it was years ago. And investing resources in a good, solid content strategy is definitely the advice of the day.
A little follow-up to this, and maybe this goes to Erin or whoever wants to chime in, but it could cause, I would think, the decentralization of higher ed could cause, we have fragmented content management systems, integrations, we have lack of unified digital policy enforcement, and all the way down to just having so much outdated content and broken links. Do any of those resonate with you, Erin? Do you see that?
Yes, absolutely. For sure. And I think I love that we're all kind of symbiotic in how we're talking about this, but there are definitely, first off, there's a great house scenario to this. When you're building a house, you really are excited about the wallpaper and the paint and the furniture you're going to put in those rooms, but what you really, really need is the drywall and the studs and the foundation. And that's not the stuff that people want to talk about when they're talking about website design. They want to talk about how to make it pretty, how to make it pop, etc. And I know designers out there just can't stand those words, but that's what we hear. But when you're thinking about a unified design system, the benefit is, and sometimes it's a hard sell, but sometimes it's a manner of getting people in there, is that it does a lot of the hard work for you. Mm-hmm. By using a unified design system or a unified CMS experience, you create those foundations and those drywalls, and then all they have to do is move in and design, right? They can choose the photos and they can, share their story and share their mission and their content. So there's a value to having those cemented parts of the brand experience, whether it's the CMS background and admin experience for authoring, or it's the front end of the design system and the structure of the pages and the content types and the structured content connection behind the scenes. And so I think those are really, really important. It's sometimes hard. What I've always advised clients to do is, especially when you're working in a large organization where you have lots of these different kind of fragmented schools or different departments, is to get a few cheerleaders on your side. Build that experience, get some cheerleaders who find value in having that there, and then help them tell the story to others to help bring more people under that umbrella. Because really, once you get in there and there is a consistent brand and there is a consistent experience, it takes a lot of load off those schools and those authors who, for the best of reasons, want to go in and do their own thing, but don't realize the lift it would take to do that solo. So having those unified experiences can be really crucial to a good governance plan and building a solid strategy.
Yeah. I agree with all that. And I really want to set the stage for this next thread of our conversation, because it starts to get into this dual approach, and it's about poor governance. And a little story from my background was that when I was in a process of centralizing some content at a large university, it was discovered that we had some conflicting information out there about general education requirements. So we have this body of content where we're trying to curate how it gets published, right? Is it meeting all the standards? Is it taken down when it needs to be? But also the discoverability of it. So we were contacted by the president's office saying, hey, we have conflicting dual information about GE requirements at our school. Maybe in the corporate world, you're not going to see that, but in such a highly decentralized environment like higher ed, we were scrambling for a day or so, finding multiple versions of GE requirements because we didn't have good policy set up to enforce the curation of that content for hundreds of people that were creating content. So can you provide any examples of how poor content governance has negatively impacted content discoverability at your institutions? Kenton, maybe?
Sure. I mean, content rot, it's a thing, right? I think that, every one of us that works in a role like this, we understand how problematic it can be when there's duplicative and sometimes different information out there. And so, I think again, just to go to the institutional policies providing the centrifugal force, I think that it's starting to become clearer and clearer to university leadership the importance of having things like controls in place. And at the administrative level, I think there's much more clarity now on the value of having more centralized rather than distributed content management. So although content might be created in a very distributed manner, I think people are definitely starting to see the value in having there be, say, the assigned people who are the administrators of a site rather than having, say 20 or 30 administrators in a site, which was fairly frequent, 5 or 10 years ago. I think now people are starting to really see the light and understand why. So I think as far as examples go, thinking about things like in a self-service model, in a big content management setup where you've enabled self-service, there are initiatives that spark up across the university quite often, a sustainability initiative, let's say, and you might find people posting information about the same event in 9 different places and describing it in different ways in a self-service model. So that is super commonplace in especially a large R1 institution.
Excellent. Joel or Erin, anything to add with poor governance examples?
I don't know that I have any specific example. I mean, I think again, Ken brought up some really relevant ones, but something that kind of I think connects to what they were both saying is, I guess Erin, you were talking about the value of the central design system and things like that, is really partnering with making sure that you're partnering if you're in the central unit or if you're in one of the distributed units, creating some sort of partnership between the people who are running the central tools and the people who are using them, and creating a good feedback loop there so that information like that, or if you have to convene a group of people that says who is going to host this content, who is going to be the authoritative source about this thing, we have to pull a group together and make a decision about that. If you've built some relationships and you have kind of longstanding working relationships with people across the institution, that's really valuable. And I think that plays on with the content side and the design side and the technology side. So.
All right. I'll tell you one. I gave you my example of conflicting general education requirements, but there's a little win in that project too, where we decided in a very tactical digital governance decision to not allow publishers to create new pages without approval. We thought it was going to wreak havoc, and they couldn't rename pages either because that would have been a way around it. And we were waiting for the phones to ring off the hook, but you know what? It worked out, and it was a really great thing to put in place. So moving on to, we all have acknowledged we have this incredibly complex digital environment we're dealing with in higher ed. I always argue it's the most complex industry out there. I've seen healthcare, it's close, but even government and private sector is not even close to what we're dealing with because we have so many silos of information, right? Even if we're not magnified to the level of a Harvard or Brown, even small institutions have data sources that are in different formats, different locations, thousands of web pages and PDFs. We have course catalog systems over here. We have directory information. We have event calendars. So when we have so many audiences to consider too, what are the biggest challenges your institution faces when you're ensuring that this content is available across, it's discoverable for these faculty, staff, and students? Start with Joel.
You gave me an easy one. Yeah, I think, given the size there is playing out as another challenge. I think there's a lot, I mean, wait, what was your question? Challenges or solutions? What am I talking about?
Challenges. I'd love to hear the solutions too.
Yeah, I mean, I think we know that data is stored in lots of different systems, and sometimes you search over here if you want to get certain information about a person, but you search over here if you want to see it's a fact mover and you want to see their CV and things like that. And so I think you have to kind of try to create interconnectivity between these places in a way that makes sense and guide users. I mean, a lot of this goes back to, we're kind of talking about user experience and how to create good user experiences in higher ed. And I think it's about really thinking about what are their needs. If I'm searching for a person or if I'm searching for an event, what is the information I'm likely going to be looking for? What is some related information I might be looking for? Even if you have to put a link that takes them to another system to learn about that, like surfacing that link there rather than just kind of leaving them to figure it out for themselves or reaching a dead end and saying, I don't know where to go now. So I think thinking about what that journey looks like for the user and then kind of trying to create connectivity points throughout that journey, even if sometimes, we would love for it all to be integrated and just wonderful and there's one search box and it does everything. But to the extent that that's not always possible, creating some sort of logical journey with internet connectivity for folks.
Yeah, I love that, Joel. And I'll maybe kind of start by describing the challenge as a symptom of what this challenge is. The symptom being a thing you hear talked about sometimes, which is, should we create a common registry for all of the websites at our institution, right? I hear that in different forums that I'm in sometimes, and some institutions are way out ahead of it, have been doing it for years. Some are just starting to think about the value of it. And so an institutional website registry or digital property registry, to the point made earlier, mobile apps are a different, level of governance than websites per se. Or what about the administrative tools that we use, like the teaching and learning systems and things of that nature, right? So what is that registry of the digital presence? And then thinking about how registries affect the way that things are managed. One thought that I hadn't thought of when we were prepping for this is the pandemic. We didn't even talk at all about the pandemic, and I think the ripple effect that the pandemic has had in the space that we all work in. So remember those scary days, the early days of the pandemic, when university administrators were saying, put notes on all of the sites, put big banner messages on every single website. Can't we just spread the message really simply? And the answer was no, not really. And I think that really was an impactful moment, kind of thinking back on those times where it started to really hit home about the fact that there isn't just a single place, to push everything. It took a little bit of doing, right? But we started to centralize the way that the communications were being pushed. The central communications office helped to lead the way and be that kind of presence, right? But it took a while for that to all, really coalesce. And so the simpler site, those folks who were managing those sites, weren't necessarily on board or didn't know, didn't understand, and didn't realize the need to kind of push those messages and the value of there being centralization there in that moment.
Erin, have anything to add?
Couldn't find my mute button. No, I don't, but I do think that there is a lot of these are all challenges that I think we don't always have. There's lots of ways to approach them and try them, and sometimes we don't learn till hindsight. What Kenton said about the pandemic, none of us could have pictured that happening. And then you sit down, you start taking stock of these things that you have, and you don't know, what do we do? What's the solution? And then how do we prevent this if this happens again? Or how do we make this better the next time around? So a lot of what we do in this industry, this is going to sound like a mindfulness moment, but is just taking a moment to breathe and realize that you are going to try some things and you may have to pivot and you may have to try them again and pivot again. And I think even when we talk about unified design systems and centralized systems, that works for some and it doesn't work for everyone. I think there's a big story in all of this in centralized design folks or folks who work on kind of the higher web level, working with the folks in the schools and building that relationship in a way that you can rely on each other instead of it being, orders from this level to this level. it becomes more of a teamwork effect, and it really should be a teamwork effect. And especially when you're facing cases like COVID, or you're facing cases where you're trying to unify, where is it appropriate to unify, where is it appropriate to remain decentralized? Those are conversations that work really well with people within the schools, but also with the folks who work in the higher, brand offices for the web, because it really is a relationship that's built best together.
Thanks, Erin. And I really want to go back to something Kenton said about COVID, and it really did make me think of how we handled that. Is we had some high-level cabinet members saying, hey, when we really need this COVID page up and we need people to get to this COVID page, but when you question like, well, who is this for? There was a lot of reasons people could be searching for COVID or coronavirus years ago. It could have been wanting to report a positive test. They wanted, information about campus policies. And so it really was a content discoverability problem because it was so fragmented. And yeah, you're right. That really did kind of change things. So we know our students are expecting more these days. They're all digital natives, right? At least the Gen Z and younger. They're loyal to brands that create personal experiences for them, and they don't even really know it. So I just wonder if at these prestigious universities like yours, is the bar even higher to provide an incredible user experience for multiple audiences? Throw that out to anyone.
I'll jump in because earlier I was talking about the aesthetic, and I want to be clear that I'm not diminishing the necessity of the aesthetic or a pleasing user experience. That's just fundamental to the work, right? But I think the most valuable user experience is really rooted in good structure, good content, right? As we talked about earlier. So I think there is a pretty high bar, with the digital natives that we all have on our campuses now. They know a heck of a lot more than I do, and I've been working in this industry. They were just born into it, right? So I think that, what we find is that the simpler, the better. The quicker in, the quicker out, the more pleasing it is to them. And so again, highly structured content is really the guidance of the day. I think the meta challenge for all of us is we can't expect every department administrator to be a content strategist, right? We just don't have that type of staffing. And so the challenge for professionals like us is to find ways to provide resources at scale, reduce the friction and the usability of the tools themselves, and then provide that kind of best practice coaching and advisory services at scale.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just echo that. I think, one of the things that's just challenging about the kind of digital space is there's so many, great companies, big companies that have lots of resources that are essentially offering their services for, free, or for, we'll put that in air quotes, for ad supported. But, from a user perspective, these things don't cost any money. So everything from Google to social media. And so absolutely, I think people's expectations in the digital space are very high because they're used to getting really great digital experiences for next to nothing. And I think that's, what we've had a big focus at Brown for the last several years on user experience. I think, if you think about the evolution of university digital ecosystems and web systems, the first couple of years, I think, or first many years, it was more about what the institution wanted, what the institution felt like it needed. And so I think the last couple of years, the last 10 years have been a transformation to really thinking about the user experience, which encompasses all the things Ken was just talking about, from design to content strategy to IA. Yeah. And we're probably, we're never going to have as many engineers as, Microsoft or OpenAI or any of those companies, but I think we can at least be mindful in how we approach those things and the experiences we are creating.
Yeah. Erin, anything to add about evolving expectations of our students?
This might be jumping ahead, and I'm happy to mention it again later, but one thing that I work with my clients on is small step content strategy. So what I think happens with any kinds of conversations like this is everything feels so big. Whether you're working in a single school, whether you're working on the more centralized web team, it feels huge. How do you tackle some of these problems? And so again, kind of going down the mindfulness path is you can do smaller steps. I've worked with government agencies that have a single platform for all of their government agencies. I did a project where I took one small agency and we pulled it apart and talked to users and talked to people who use the content, really talk to them, because I think even when we work in our fields, we think we know the answers to what users are looking for. And we're a little bit more disconnected than we realize. I think going out and talking to real users, in this case, if it's prospective students, asking prospective students what questions they have about going to college, what concerns do they have, what fears do they have, what are they looking for when they go online, how are they finding information about colleges they're interested in, really truly understanding that, and not just using Google Analytics, which is a great tool, but really truly talking to people. And in doing that, in my experiences, I have gotten the most useful information and path forward, because even going into a project like the one I just mentioned, where I did a very small agency, I went in with an assumption and we pivoted completely once we got in there and talked to people. And so it gave us a chance to really sit down and focus on a very finite number of pages that we wanted to improve, a finite number of content, a finite number of functionalities. And then we went with that and tracked that for 3 to 6 months to see how it did. And that becomes a really great, I'm going to say, sales tactic to use with other agencies or other schools in your system to go talk about these different ways they can improve their stuff. And so it might take the school sitting down and thinking about what's most important to them and their audiences, and then tackling that. But one small step at a time. You don't have to completely burn down the house to redesign your website or whatever you're working on. You can really do, 5-10 pages at a time if that's all you can manage with the resources you have.
Thanks, Erin. What we're kind of getting at, right, is personalization. It's about, we kind of need to predict what our students need and give it to them before they even ask for it. And it's really hard, right? Netflix can do it and Spotify does it really well, but personalization has been so hard for universities for a decade now or longer. Well, the example I like to use is that when someone comes to your site and searches for communications or business or marketing, we don't really know their intent. We're getting better at that. They might be looking for an academic major, but they could be looking for that administrative office. And so since we don't know that, I think we need to be giving them some choices. And if let's say you're searching for nursing, what if you could show really facet out the different types of data related to that query? If it's an academic program, maybe it's on this list. If it's the list of faculty right next to it that the student didn't even think of looking at, wow, they have a lot of credentialed faculty. I've just been influenced a little more that this school is legit for nursing. We really don't know, but I think we need to give our students more choices in how they're looking for our data, since we can't personalize and we haven't quite got there yet. So let's move on to this question about data. Can you talk about the data you use to help drive strategic decisions on your campus? Kenton?
Yeah, sure. I sit in central IT, so I won't speak on behalf of the institution. I'll speak just on behalf of the service team I'm a part of. And when we think about driving strategic decisions and we're looking at evolving out of a legacy platform into new services, I used the phrase content rot earlier, which I think is probably close to the hearts of many of the folks that are in the audience today. We really focused a lot on the content rot issue as we evaluated thousands of sites that are running on our legacy platforms in advance of moving things into our new systems. And so, I think that's certainly a key part of using data to help drive strategic decisions. And likewise, it helped to set the stage for really thinking hard about things like lifecycle management policies. And so using data to help inform how we set policies, I think sets up the enduring oversight of how we'll run and manage the services moving forward.
Excellent.
Yeah, just to kind of tag on to that, I think, I think we have to think about the goals of whatever element of the web or the digital presence we're thinking about, because there are so many different goals. And you really want to look at data that tells you something about the goals of that particular website or that particular element. Sometimes it's analytics, sometimes it's, or a site that's aimed at prospective students, and you can draw sometimes fairly clear lines about did they, submit their email address for inquiry? Did they click the apply button? So sometimes there's very nice, neat, again, I'm using on air quotes on neat ways to measure that. And then I think, Erin, something you said, I think you were kind of talking about either talking to users or doing usability testing of your site, I think is really valuable. If you're kind of looking for, are we creating a great user experience? There's lots of, information if you've worked in the, you have a lot of foundational things you can start with and a lot of assumptions you can make, but nothing is really a great substitute for having users actually use your site and watching them do it. So I think, just thinking about the kind of the experience you're trying to create, the goal you're trying to accomplish, and what data helps you measure that.
Yeah. So having spent the last 3 years of my career focused on content discovery, I have to provide this little tidbit. Is I recently saw one institution that saw that dental hygiene was being searched, one of their top search majors out there through their search tool, and they didn't offer that major. No results were coming up. So they were looking at trying to add that program due to that data they found on the back end. And we even saw another school, their click-through rate improved 14% year over year just by looking at their search results, queries, and data, and updating content to fill gaps that they were seeing. So just another perspective on the data side of it. But let's move on to kind of an agency question. For Erin, when Lullabot's undertaking these large web projects, how do you tackle content discovery? I've often seen it's not scoped in. Is it scoped into part of the project?
We emphasize it. I mean, that is the drum I will beat every second. Content discovery is something that's often overlooked. I think, when you're doing a content project, pulling pages, looking at the content rot, is it redundant? Is it outdated? Is it trivial? Is there still value to this mission and the people we're trying to reach with this? If it doesn't, pull it. Analytics. If you're a small team at a small school and you're like, I don't even know where to start with this, pulling your analytics, look at your lowest trafficked pages and start there. Don't necessarily delete them, but review them. Are they low traffic because they're hard to find, because the content's old, because it's not being indexed as well? Or is it truly just not serving its purpose? Or look at your highest traffic pages. Are those still meeting the mark for who you're trying to reach? Those are the big questions we always pass on to our clients when we start a project for content discovery. But also there's parts of, for example, I've worked with organizations that have surveys on their website. On every page of the website, did you find what you're looking for? Now that opens up a whole host of not a great box of chocolates. You really don't know what you're going to get with answers with that, but you are going to get some really good feedback from people who really care to share their experience, good or bad. And that can help drive as well from real people who are actually on the other side of the screen, understandings of what's working and what's not. What are they trying to look for? So, Jeff used that example of the dental hygiene program. Using search as a way to get feedback and kind of see where people are looking for, get a pulse check on the audience. What are they searching for? Where are they bouncing around to? Why are they looking this up? Is there something news breaking? Are they getting our organization confused with another? You never know, but it always helps to look at search because you do have real people looking for things. I mean, we are all searchers ourselves. So we're going to those tools to use them to find something. So using those as a guide of gaps, but then also, like Joel and Kenton have talked about, going out and talking to the audience about that. Are there any folks out there you can talk to one-on-one to find out that experience? Why were they searching for that? What brought them there? That helps you understand more of the pathway. That will help maybe fill in some of those gaps of content that you didn't know you needed.
Excellent. Great. So I want to leave some time for some questions. So just a couple more here. Can we talk, I guess anyone on the panel here, talk about the impact of content discoverability on student recruitment and retention? We have this enrollment cliff coming up, maybe not as relevant for these prestigious institutions, but I would like your take on how is that affecting recruitment and retention from your perspective?
I think we know, I've from our analytics data, and I think it's pretty widely known and published in white papers and things around the industry, that like academic program pages are often the most highly trafficked pages in a higher ed institution. Whatever your majors are, if you're undergraduate, your graduate program pages, your PhD pages. And so I think it's usually one of the first questions people are investigating, right? Is do you have the degree program that I'm interested in, or do you have the program I'm interested in? And so I think making sure that you can answer that question quickly and definitively for people is absolutely essential. And then again, providing a pathway for them if you have the program they're interested in, or a similar program perhaps that they're interested in that they weren't considering. Even better if you can surface something like that to them. Starting to guide them down the path for how to engage with the university on that. So I think we know that this is just from analytics data and from user conversations, that this is critically important for folks.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And the fun part of using analytics in that way is the arms race that it creates among all the different disciplines trying to compete with one another for the best talent.
Yeah, agree. So what are, kind of summarizing some of this we've talked about, what are the essential must-haves when you're considering building a more user-friendly experience for a website? I can start with Erin.
Okay, we're gonna TLDR this team, aren't we? There's so much that goes into it. I would say, again, focus on discoverability. Give yourself ample time to talk to people, to get real data. Yes, look at your analytics. Yes, look at the data, the numbers, but then try to verify that data with your audience. Understand who this is really for. Our jobs, whether you're an agency, whether you work at a school, is to connect people with information. And we've all been there on the web where we've been frustrated by not being able to find an answer to a question. And we don't want to put other people in that situation. But the best way to do that is to understand what they're looking for to begin with, so we can deliver as close to experience, as close to an answer as we can, as efficiently as possible. So make room to talk to folks. Build a team. We've talked a little bit about governance quite a bit in this panel, but building a RACI chart, identifying who's responsible for doing the thing and pressing the publish button, but who's maybe on the other end informed or maybe accountable but not really doing the work, but who will be useful for making those decisions. Building that team environment, understanding the roles and responsibilities will help a project go smoother. Just like I said earlier, building a relationship with that central team or building that relationship with those school teams to help kind of work together, because it truly is, there's so much knowledge sharing to be had between different groups of people in these environments. And so bringing them all under one roof, or in a once a month brown bag lunch call where you talk about what's challenging you, whatever works, having those relationships can really build a better experience, in addition to all of the fundamental CMS, the brand styles, the brand guides and all of that, but really truly focusing on your users and focusing on each other and how you can help each other and solve these problems together with the help of the people out there that you're trying to solve it for.
Thanks, Erin. I'm going to wrap it up with one last question before we get into some QA. And it's really looking ahead. What do you see as the next big challenge for digital governance in higher ed, and how are you preparing to meet it? A big one to end here, Joel and Kenton.
Am I required to say AI?
I think you're required.
Yes, this is why we saved it for the end, okay? Only a few minutes.
No, I say it facetiously, but that is obviously going to have a pretty big impact on things, and I think largely in a positive way. A lot remains to be determined and understood with regard to the impact, but I can see things like we're talking in this conversation, we're talking about the type of work that we do, like content auditing, thinking about, gathering a bunch of vocabulary terms included in taxonomies that were created by people that may or may not have expertise. I think we can really leverage AI to have a much more positive impact just simply from an efficiency perspective. When you think about the time and rigor it takes to go through and do some of those things that we as practitioners have been doing for years, I think we're gonna see a big kind of improvement just in our ability to turn things around like that and leverage AI. And then I think, as it relates to things like search, the trustworthiness of a chat-like interface, I think will just improve year over year over year. So I think the thing that we talked about earlier with the digital natives wanting to jump in and jump out quickly to get the information that's relevant for them, I think that's where we'll also see a really meaningful impact.
Thanks, Kenton.
Yeah, I would echo that in terms of how we're thinking about meeting the challenge. I think we're still in a space of like learning building knowledge, building expertise, building kind of operational capacity, we've started doing things like articulating kind of principles and guidelines. How do we think about these things? We're not in a place yet of articulating policies because I think the technology itself is still a moving target and we're still learning about how we can use it. For those of us who remember like the advent of social media on I think at universities, I think this is kind of a useful guideline or a useful kind of facsimile to go back and look at how did that evolve. It started with people using it, people kind of developing best practices and guidelines, and then eventually, it came to a place of kind of policy and more and staffing and operations and all of those types of things. So I think we're trying to think about this in a similar way.
Thank you. So before we go into Q&A, I kind of learned some things. I think some key takeaways are that we need to have a flexible digital experience. We need to get used to evolving expectations. And I'll add one saying, I think content discovery is somewhat of low-hanging fruit and something that's probably even more important now that navigation is so tricky with all our content. I'm going to put up a slide with our contact information, but please stick around for the QA. And tell me, have this. You'll see Erin or I would be happy to talk to anyone here about anything we talked about. And even if you had questions about a project you're working on, just reach out by email or even LinkedIn for us. We will also be at Albuquerque in 5 days next week at the Higher Ed Web Annual Conference. So we'd love to see you there. Reach out because we have some fun things going on in Albuquerque. And I'm going to move on to questions and see what we have. Oh, here's the one that I really want to address. And it is, actually, it's a good one for Erin. Erin, how do you balance audiences when you have more than one audience, but one or two are more important than the others?
I never like making one audience more important than the other, but so I understand this question and this strife that comes from it. So I think what it comes down to again is why are we here? And you're going to have audiences. All of your audiences are important, no doubt. But why are you here? Why is your organization in business? Who are you serving? Really focusing on that. And this is, I know this is a higher ed conversation, but this is really for any organization. Who are you serving? Who's coming in the door? Who are you trying to attract to your business, to your organization, to your school? That's really going to be your key priority. That should be your key priority. That does not mean that other audiences are less than. I like to consider primary audiences and tertiary audiences. I don't even like saying secondary or third or any of that because then you're kind of placing them and that's rude. But there are primary audiences or an audience and there's tertiary. So the folks that are tertiary are probably just smaller groups of people, but are still valuable to your organization. So focusing on those primary audiences first is always going to be essential because that's really who you're serving and why you're there and why you do what you do every day. But those tertiary audiences too have a need on the site. Now, I can't dictate what those are for you. That's something that I work with my clients on to help decide. And from there, we really focus on building a core strategy statement for each of those audiences. So we're trying to provide X type of content for X type of user so they can fill in the blank. That's what you want to understand because the bigger those fill in the blanks are, the more primary those audiences are probably going to be to your organization.
Thanks, Erin. So another one here we have, I really want to start off with some comments on this one and then hand it off. But the question is, should we really focus on search when students just use Google these days, especially with AI coming? I'm not going to talk about the AI. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But just to the first part of that, I did a little research preparing for this, and students are using your campus website. It's in the data. They're using your search off your homepage. And I've talked to 30 or so schools in the past couple of months, and I can tell you that they're generating dozens of thousands of searches per month on these campus searches. So the top terms, I even looked at top terms with a set of about a dozen clients, and 60 to 90% of those terms are for academic majors. So although Google might be getting some of this traffic, they're on our site and they're probably further along in their journey to select your institution because they found so much about information elsewhere. They're confirming it now or looking, at the details of that program. So any other thoughts from the panelists about on that one? The second part of it was about AI, and it kind of goes into this other question about AI is how is the onset of ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, and other popular Gen AI solutions, which will take the form of a single search box, change expectations and behavior on the web? I think you have to look at the opportunities that AI unlocks in the context of a great search. And so it's not going to be a wholesale move from core search technologies to AI. And it's about what Ken talked about, I think earlier, it's about trust. Search results, no matter the technology, they have to focus on relevancy first. So we see it as a hybrid approach that leverages core search technology, AI, and human intelligence to offer the most relevant and reliable, trusted results. So
I think it also comes in, again, the value and importance of auditing your content, governing your content, gardening your website in a sense, governing it well, making sure the content you have is valuable to your audience and not just something that some random stakeholder asked for, making sure that it's structured in a sensible manner, that the pages are connected appropriately through a hierarchy that makes sense, because AI can only do as much as we give it access to. It is not, it doesn't run on its own. It needs our information and our language to run from. And similarly, if you have an AI chatbot that's helping find content for users on your site, if that site is hard to structure, is not structured well, is not laid out well, is not connected well, that AI is not going to serve as much of a function as you hope it will. It's not going to solve all your problems. So you still need to stick with the basics of content structure and good information architecture to build that experience. And likewise, if you do employ AI, think about building a policy around it. I don't know how popular those are these days. I think I've seen some coming around, but start thinking about how does AI play a role in our policies for accessibility and for our branding so that you have some, connection there between your brand and how you're employing AI if you decide to go that direction.
Right. AI for Joel or Ken, anyone want to touch on anymore? Right. So here's one. Probably only have time for one or two more here. What are our new metrics or conversions we should strive to achieve at the end of the day? Ken or Joel, you have a comment on that? I have a thought, but I want to hear your point of view if you have.
I mean, I think we, again, I think I kind of covered this earlier in the way that it really depends on the goal of whatever particular, website, digital app, or whatever it is you're looking at is, and thinking about the metrics there, because it really, when you're talking about such a large, diverse presence with such a large, diverse set of audiences, it depends. Sorry, that's not a very fun answer, but I think at least that's my answer.
Yeah.
I had a similarly non-fun answer. Yes.
All right. We have like 1 minute left, and I'm not sure if we're just going to actually get cut off hard here too. So we have many more questions, and we will follow up with these via email, but I feel like I can't take any more. That was really engaging. I was excited to really learn some stuff from the whole panel. Again, the slide's up to contact us. Reach out to Erin or I. We will be a High Ed Web, and thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks for